Okay, we've been trying to help you to see that Jesus was an A equals B Messiah. That from the very beginning, His heart was in all nations. But there are some people who refuse to believe that. In fact, there are some liberal theologians who basically felt that Jesus never gave the Great Commission. They've got three reasons for it. Number one, they said if Jesus had actually given the Great Commission, those words would have been so upturning in their lives. It would have turned their lives totally upside down. They would have had to gotten passports, learn new languages, worry about their kids' schooling, worry about kosher food all over the globe, that they surely would have been writing about it and quoting Matthew 28, 18-20 in all of their later writings. But you never see Matthew 28, 18-20 ever quoted in any of the other later writings. Hence, Jesus must not have said Matthew 28, 18-20. What must have happened? They think. It must have been some Gentiles on the Italian peninsula who said, wow, we like this Christianity thing, but we're not included in the text, so let's just write it in at the very end that Jesus said, go to make disciples of all nations. And that's how the Great Commission got in. Now, that is said with an A greater than B perspective, and also spoken without understanding that Jesus never gave the Messiah, Jesus never gave the Great Commission. He reviewed it. And it began in Genesis chapter 12. And the disciples do quote Genesis chapter 12 in their later writings to each other. In the book of Acts, Peter quotes Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. Paul to the Galatians quotes Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. What are they doing? They're quoting the original source Jesus opened up their eyes to in order to understand the Great Commission. Well, so that negates the number one reason why people don't think that the Great Commission was firmly embedded in the New Testament. But there's two other reasons, and each is a passage of Scripture. These are the two tough passages that seem to communicate that Jesus was not sent to the Gentiles. And until we address these two tough passages, we'll always have questions in our mind. The first passage is the Canaanite woman. The second passage is the sending of the 12. Let's look at the Canaanite woman first. We've already talked about her, but we're going to go much more in depth into looking at this passage. The Canaanite woman is found in Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 to 23, and it reads this way. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession. Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. He replied, it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Yes, Lord, she said, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. Then Jesus answered, woman, you've got great faith. Your request is granted, and her daughter was healed that very hour. Did you see those key words? I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel? Jesus, how could you say this? You're violating your job description of Isaiah 49, chapter 49, verse 6. You're supposed to be a whole covenant Messiah, and A equals B Messiah. It is too small of a thing for you to be God's servant to restore the tribes of Jacob and to bring back those of Israel I have kept. God says He'll also make you a light to the Gentiles, that His salvation might go to the ends of the earth. And you say, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel? How does He do that? And then He goes on down later and He calls the woman a dog. It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Obviously, Jesus had not read Dale Carnegie's book on how to win friends and influence people. You never call somebody a dog that you're trying to win into the kingdom of God for eternity. How do we deal with this passage? Well, you need to know Muslims love this passage. In fact, many Muslim evangelists come here to the United States and use this passage to lead people away from Christianity into Islam. They say, look, right there in the text, Jesus was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Are you a Jew? I don't think so. You look like a non-Jewish person to me. Therefore, Islam is your religion, and you should be in the true and final religion for all of mankind. How do we as Christians deal with this passage? Well, it's very simple. Get out a pair of scissors, okay, and then just cut very carefully down the lines right here. Or, no, of course you don't do that. How do we deal with a passage? We deal with it by looking at it in its context. We talked about this earlier. Let's go in depth to it. In the context, Jesus was with his disciples early on in the chapter. In Matthew chapter 15, verses 1 to 21, in Capernaum, he's not washing their hands, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees challenge him and say, "Hey, how come your disciples don't wash their hands like they should?" And Jesus begins to answer them. What he basically said is what makes a man clean versus unclean has nothing to do with whether your hands are dirty. It has everything to do with what your heart is thinking and feeling. In other words, what comes out of your mouth and what is on the inside of your heart determines whether you are clean or unclean, not whether you're dirty on the outside. In other words, Jesus is saying, it doesn't matter whether you're a Jew or a Gentile. What matters is your heart before God. That's what matters. In other words, Jesus had just taught an A equals B lesson to the Pharisees and the Sadducees that were there, and his disciples were listening. He taught his disciples an A equals B lesson. Then what did he do? Look again at verse 21. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon. Remember that on our map? It's in Syria. It's north of the Sea of Galilee. It's north of Capernaum, kind of the northwest area. It's total Gentile territory. Why was Jesus going to Gentile territory? He had just taught his disciples a lesson, A equals B, and now he's taking them on a field trip to see if they're going to apply the A equals B perspective. What happens? Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession." Okay, how did she know about him? Well, remember, word was getting around already in Matthew chapter 4. We saw people from Tyre and Sidon coming down and having their people healed. So she knew this was the miracle worker. So she comes down and says, "My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession." Now look at the very next words. Jesus did not answer a word. Jesus didn't answer a word? Was Jesus speechless? Was this sometime, the first time ever Jesus got caught off guard saying, a Gentile, a woman Gentile, what do I do? No. Jesus never had moments like that. What was he doing? He was waiting to see how his disciples would respond. He had just taught them an A equals B lesson. He took them on a show and tell to take them up to Gentile territory to see Gentiles. Sure enough, a Canaanite woman comes and she says, "Please heal my daughter." And so Jesus is saying, "What do you think, guys? What do you think, this woman? She wants your daughter healed. What do you think we should do?" Jesus didn't answer a word. How did the disciples do? What did they say? So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." The disciples began to hold a little party. They began to say, "Yeah, Jesus, get her out of here. We don't want anything to do with Gentiles, especially Gentile women." What happened? The disciples failed their test. The disciples failed their test. Jesus had just taught them an A equals B perspective. He takes them on a field trip to apply A equals B, and they go straight back to A is greater than B. And Jesus says, "Guys, what are you doing?" And I want to propose to you that Jesus, for the next 30 seconds, begins to live out their theology. He's basically saying, is this the kind of theology you want to live out? Is this the way you want it to be? Okay, for the next 30 seconds, I'm going to live out your theology. And so somehow, with a twinkle in his eyes, somehow he non-verbally communicated to the Canaanite woman, "Hang in there, honey. I'm trying to teach my disciples a lesson. Just hang in there in light of these words." And what does he say? Jesus, in living out their theology, says these words, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." Oh, yeah. The disciples began to hold a party even greater. This is wonderful. Rah, rah. You know, Israel, we're the ones. Pass it on. This is great. Jesus, this is wonderful. The woman, somehow seeing the twinkle of his eye, came back and knelt before him and said, Lord, help me, she said. He replied, it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Okay, 3 key words in there. Number 1, children's. Number 2, bread. And number 3, dogs. What is Jesus saying? He's saying it's not right to take the children's bread and give it to the dogs. Children's represents the Israelites. Bread represents blessings. Dog represents Gentiles. What is Jesus saying? He basically said it's not right to take Israel's blessings and give it to the Gentiles, which is a direct misquote of what passage? That's right, the Abrahamic covenant. Jesus just misquoted the Abrahamic covenant. You wonder where we got the idea of misquoting scriptures, which we commonly do in our seminars. We got it from Jesus. It's not right to take the Israel's blessings and give it to the Gentiles. A direct misquote of Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. And probably at that point in time, James must have looked at John and said, oh man, we've been had. He's going to heal this woman. I just know it. Sure enough. Lord, she said, even the dogs eat the crumbs. Yes, Lord, she said, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered, woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted. And her daughter was healed that very hour. Now, many theologians will try to tell you that Jesus was trying to test the faith of a Gentile woman. We're saying, no, not at all. Many times, Jesus lifted up the faith of Gentiles over those of his Jews. What was he trying to do? He wasn't trying to test a Gentile woman's faith. He was trying to teach his disciples a lesson. That one tough passage has now been answered. When we begin to realize Jesus was not just sent to the Jews only, he was an A equals B Messiah from the very beginning.